Who've just seen this film, I'm sure were very moved, just like I was, by the force and the strength of these women who actually travel the world over to help other women and to also give them new ways to actually experience their freedom. So I'm lucky enough to actually be here to continue along the lines. Thanks to Agata Czarnacka. Did I pronounce it correctly? So I'd like to thank Agata for having traveled from Poland, where women's rights are in dire straits and need to be. So thank you for being so many of you this afternoon to defend women's rights. And so I think, Rokhaya Diallo deserves a warm round of applause. And she also traveled to Geneva to tell us about all the work she's involved in. And
Françoise est venue exprès des États-Unis pour expliquer ce qui se
and
passe
also
depuis un certain président.
Thank her for actually coming from the United States since the election of a president. So women's rights, we talked about this already before the screening. So women's rights are actually a sign of advance of democracy, because, and of course you can't have democracy if you don't have the advancement of women's rights. So there is perhaps a regression of democracy nowadays, and actually an erosion of democratic principles. And in France, I think within a very short time frame, we may have serious problems. But let's first talk about Poland. So Poland, Agnieszka. Agata, tell us a little bit more about the election, and also tell us why women's rights that go hand in hand, the regression of women's rights that go hand in hand with the actually regression of public liberties, and also less and less freedom of expression. So how did it happen? How was it made possible?
It's not a normal name, but yes, I find the question very pertinent. Well, first of all, during the last election, parliamentary as well as presidential, the subject of women's rights or minority rights.
Vous pouvez parler en français. Vous parlez excellemment le français.
Yes, but yes, in here I was even asked to say hello to the girls in Warsaw and in Poland, in all Poland, that are watching it through the streaming. So, hello, God bless you, or Goddess bless you, Congress Kobiet and Protest Kobiet. Thank you for listening. So I will continue in English because it is much better known language in Poland than the French.
Et alors, est-ce qu'il y a une traduction simultanée pour les personnes qui... Oui? Ah, ok.
So the subject of women's rights was never tackled in the elections, in the elections campaigns. It was a negligence. Well, you know perfectly well that we have a female prime minister. Yes, it was. Yes, it is. She's quite well known at this point in Europe, but well, she is a person that would be that would even switch places with Marine Le Pen as a woman who would serve a very masculinist worldview, a very masculinist approach to the politics. Well, we have quite forgotten to claim our rights. Before the transition in what we are calling the People's Republic of Poland, so in the communist time, the women's rights, well, were not exactly given, but a certain equality was maintained because it was needed for a developing country to develop better, because, well, economies need women. So we were quite equal. Maybe the rights weren't there that much, but still we were quite appreciated. But after the transition, that was one of the subjects that were completely lost. And the symbol for that is obviously the law from the 1993 law that restricted the access to legal abortion to 3 exceptions that you probably know of, but I will repeat anyway. We can only legally abort in Poland when we are raped, when we are in grave risk of our health and life, or when the fetus is malformed and with little chances to survive. Other than that, you are obliged to give birth. Well, obviously with a natality rate of 1.3, it's not exactly the most observed rule in Poland. We are aborting all the time, and Langenort was a breaking point, actually, because we have discovered that when we go abroad, we can abort legally and in comfort instead of going underground.
Pouvez-vous nous expliquer quelle a été
Can you explain to us what was how women fighting for the rights express themselves, and how were they able to actually convince the government?
The government in place is a Catholic one, or is a conservative one that is very is intensively linked to Catholic Church in Poland and various Catholic groups. And those Catholic groups lobbied for the restriction of, for total ban on abortion, so for liquidation of all the exceptions. They proposed this is called a citizens' initiative. A project of a law is being signed by plenty of people. You have to have 100,000 signatures, handwritten signatures, so you have to collect them like on the streets. But with the support of the parishes, of the churches, of the preachers, the priests, they didn't have much trouble in collecting those signatures. So when they started to collect, we decided, well, they are collecting this, and the law will probably pass because the government is so conservative that they will never consider anything regarding the women. So we decided to write down our own project of the law, and we have actually collected 250,000 of signatures. So the parliament was legally bound to read the project. Well, the project was rejected in the first reading on a session of the parliament in late September, and then all hell broke loose. I was at the first black protest, which took place actually in September, before the Black Monday, the huge Black Monday that was so massive that everybody knew about us. And then, yes, the government finally understood that women are there, and women have power, and women have some means to act that men are actually powerless against. Like, we can just withdraw from domestic duties. And yes, and that was the start. The government backpedaled on the legislation, well, the conservative legislation, which was read along our own and not rejected. Am I being clear? So 2 projects of the law, one liberal, one very conservative. The liberal is rejected, the conservative passes on, but then gets rejected, but only after the massive protests. Yet we still have this problem of 3 exceptions that, only 3 exceptional cases that permit Polish women to perform abortions if they don't want to have the baby. So, And in other cases, we have to go for women on web, women on waves, or just for, let's say, abortion tourism, as we call it in Poland.
Quel est l'état des libertés des femmes dans votre propre pays,
so,
la Pologne?
so in Poland, Agata, what is the conditions? Agata. Agata.
Quel est l'état
No, so tell us about the status of women's rights in your country.
Nominally, we are equal, except for the right to decide on what's happening with our own bodies. But, well, the law says that we are. The law says that equal pay is obligatory, that we have equal rights in every domain of public life. That's the constitution. And we also have some, we are also bound by European legislation, by European directives regarding equal rights of women and men. But the problem is this is only on paper. So obviously the question of how it is, how the equality of, how the gender equality is infringed upon, or how it is broken, or how it is not observed, it varies. In some regards, it's better in big cities. In some regards, it's better you fare better in the villages. But basically, we are not respected, and that's what pains the most. And this is exactly why we are continuing the protest. We have decided to go for the systematic violence against women, both state violence that is pronounced through bad legislation or withdrawing some empowering programs or health programs that are only for women, which are being cancelled at this point. But also domestic violence, which is not exactly combated or eliminated as it should be. So we are also fighting the militarization of our society. Yes, because Poland at this point is very much concentrated on war heroes, on reclaiming the war heroes and the so-called, how do they call them in English? Those soldiers, those militia soldiers who fought communist power after the World War II. So we are trying our best to, let's say, modernize our society in such a way that modernity was conceived in the first place, with equal rights for everyone. And we are really enraged at this point, because the more each day, each week of the power of the conservatives brings new surprises and new infringements on women's rights.
Merci beaucoup Agata. On reviendra sur la.
Thank you very much, Agata. We will be revisiting the situation of women's rights in Poland, and so now you're in the United States, and so we were talking about solidarity amongst women, and we were talking about also how women together had succeeded in preventing this legal loophole created by the Polish government. So how can you explain how a majority of white women, they voted for Donald Trump despite his his campaign that was very insulting to women?
Thank you, Laure. I'll also speak English because my audience is in the United States. Well, we have female patriarchs everywhere, such as your Prime Minister, and in the United States, and I'm sure here too, who have decided to stand by the patriarchal system and to, because they think they will gain from it, or at least make their way through it. So that's what we observed. But there's also an incredible mobilization that is taking place in the United States with social movements of all kinds uniting to say no. This is not the vision of the United States that we want for the future. And it had, I have to be clear, it had started before the election of Donald Trump, and it began in particular, I think, this new impetus of cross-movement and cross-sector organizing began a couple of years ago with the movement for Black Lives. You've heard of it, Black Lives Matter, and other movements of women of color, Muslim women, because there's been so much violence, police brutality in the last few years, that movements have really put these questions on the agenda and have put them on the agenda for all social progressives, saying this is not going to be the combat of Black people alone anymore. We need all social movements to come together on this issue. The same with migrants and Muslims and and others, and young people in particular, I think, are very interested in the United States in this notion that we should have an intersectional analysis of what's going on in society. And we saw it in January in Washington, D.C., and at all these women's marches around the world. There were almost 700 women's marches where all the issues were on the table: migrant rights, racial justice, the environment, peace and security, police brutality, reproductive rights, reproductive justice. And it was led by women. So the women's movement really was able to convene and organize people, but it was a broad message. And I find that incredibly encouraging, in spite of, it's a dark time in the United States, but I'm somewhat encouraged. I guess I have to be, otherwise I wouldn't work in women's rights, because you have to be an eternal optimist. But I see the possibility of these social movements really creating something much more powerful. Because, when we work in silos, like, labor rights here and environment there, it's easy to divide us, to pit us against each other and make us believe that if someone gains something, someone else loses something. But if we're all together and we realize that we have actually a common, bigger agenda, I think we can inspire many more people. But also, it's not easy to pull apart some of the most controversial issues. And we've experienced that in the reproductive rights movement. My organization, the International Women's Health Coalition, works on abortion rights, contraception, sexuality education, HIV prevention for teenagers, so-called controversial issues. We found in the last few years, notably, and in our advocacy at the United Nations with women's groups from all over the world, that when we're embedded in women's rights and in broader social justice movements, it's very hard to pull us out. And if we stand alone and just ask for abortion rights, it's really easy to marginalize us and say, well, we're not ready for that. That will come later. Let's work on something else first. So that's, I think, an important realization of progressive forces and an important strategy for us for the future.
Merci beaucoup, Françoise.
Thank you very much, Françoise. So, how can you decipher what do you see behind Donald Trump's campaign against women's rights? I mean, how did it serve him? And is this, an indicator that the patriarchal system is back?
It served him for electoral purposes. I mean, I don't think anyone, and I live in New York City and I've talked to many people who've known Donald Trump socially. They never thought of him as a social conservative or particularly concerned about abortion one way or the other. In fact, he was probably in favor. But he realized at some point early in his campaign that in order to win, he was going to need social conservatives and the evangelical vote. And so he made a deal with them through the choice of his vice president, Mike Pence. Mike Pence is a very staunch social conservative who has a long track record of anti-abortion, anti-gay legislation. I mean, he is the guy who, when he was governor of Indiana, actually signed a piece of legislation which would have forced women to hold burials for fetal tissue. So if you had an abortion or a miscarriage, you would have had to have a burial for the fetus. So that kind of thinking is Mike Pence. So when Trump made his deal, he was sending a signal, without having to say too much, but a clear signal to social conservatives that you have your man in the administration. And so now he has to deliver, because of course they know what they want, and they want to return to this mythical era when women were at home, married to a man, taking care of the family in the kitchen, and barefoot and pregnant. That is the vision, and I'm not kidding. It really is the vision, because right now we're seeing a flurry of laws being passed by the different states in the United States on abortion and other issues. They eventually hope that these cases will go up to the Supreme Court of the United States when we have a different set of judges. And some of the laws are really that vision. One of them in Oklahoma would require a woman to get the permission of a man to obtain an abortion. So she would need to get the permission of the janitor, the father, or whatever you want to call him, to get an abortion. So that's a very regressive vision of patriarchy, old-fashioned, patriarchy that is definitely embedded in the administration. And so that's what he started with. On day 3 of his administration, one of the first things he did was to enact the global gag rule, which is a restriction on US foreign assistance to any organization abroad that even mentions the word abortion in a clinic, or has a pamphlet, that says here are your options for safe abortion, or if this organization wants to participate in democratic debates in the country about the legalization of abortion, that's also forbidden. So if you take US money, you're gagged, So that's why it's called a global gag rule. And it's now been expanded under Trump to cover all US global health funding. So that's about $10 billion of funding that is now conditioned by this. So the idea is to really delegitimize abortion, stigmatize it, make it less available, and basically cut the funding to organizations that provide comprehensive care and that are pro-choice in developing countries where women already have so little access to good reproductive health care.
Je crois que c'est la première fois qu'une
It's the first time that an election in the US was followed by such a huge demonstration in Washington, D.C., and everywhere else in the world. So we'll talk in a few minutes about what happened in Geneva. So can you tell us a little bit more, the extent and the consequences, the repercussions of this demonstration? So okay. So I'll talk English. Yes, there was even actually a demonstration in Antarctica. Again, women are everywhere. I mean, there are women everywhere, and they do great things everywhere. So it's true. It was very, very important. It was crucial. Where all the social progressive movements from all sectors got together. So I think everyone became aware. I mean, he started by getting at women's rights, and that's what all the populists or authoritarians from everywhere, whether it be in Poland, they always start with that. And I mean, and I think there's a lack of imagination, but it's the same in Turkey, in India, etc., in Russia. That's what they go for, women's rights. Brazil, but in Brazil, it's been going on for many, many years. I mean, that's another story. So women's rights and the rights to reproduction, I mean, we're a bit, like the canary in the mine. So if something, goes wrong, it's going to start with that, because in the mines they used to have a little canary. So if there was the canary would die, and that was a signal that you had to leave the mine. Women's rights are fundamental when you're talking about the rights of the individual, and it's fundamental if you want to have democracy. I mean, you can't have democracy, a real democracy, and real fundamental rights when the women who represent more than 50% of the world's population, if they can't actually control their sexuality, their right to decide what to do with their body. I mean, sometimes, we look at each other, we're not going to talk about abortion again, but yes, we need to talk about abortion because it is crucial, it's fundamental, and you can't get around it. And if you talk about women's equality, you've got to talk about abortion. Yes, I mean, in November, when Trump was chosen as president, we knew that he would go for women's rights. He also said he would go for environment, the Paris agreements on the climate change, and he was also going to go for the migrants. I'm going to build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, and I'll throw everybody else, and Mexico's going to have to pay for the wall. It might have seemed totally,
En général, quand les gens disent des choses comme ça, moi j'ai tendance à les prendre au sérieux. Et effectivement, on avait raison.
And we were right to take him seriously. And the social movements understood that they had to unite and not go and you couldn't have the people demonstrating on Monday for migrants, on Tuesday for women, and on Wednesday. But you have to understand that it all is the same thing. I mean, we're all living on the same planet, and amongst the migrants you have women as well, and everybody was actually battling for the same thing, and that is what we did. We united. I mean, it wasn't easy. We had to set up a platform for the demonstration that required quite a lot of efforts in our association. I mean, we were partners of the demonstration, and there was quite a lot of discussions where we decided whether abortion was a fundamental right. And, there was some ifs and buts at the beginning, but obviously,
qui ne croient pas à l'avortement, au droit à l'avortement, alors ils peuvent venir, mais ils ne peuvent pas être partenaires.
They can't be a partner if they don't feel that abortion is a right of women, and the same goes for and again sex workers, and you know that there's a debate within the feminist movement, and recognize that they had to be represented as well, those who actually use their body to make a living. And I was in Washington with my team and others, and when there were so many people coming in. I mean, it was actually lines of people coming out of the subway, and it gives me goosebumps just talking about. Yes, I've got the chills just talking about it. It was unbelievable. Men, women, young people, families, all colors, every culture, every countries, all religions. It was unbelievable. A never to be forgotten moment, and you could feel something important was happening there. And there was a demonstration on March 8th, and it's continuing. And I mean, the repercussions are immense, and I think we're going to see the results in the 4 coming years. I mean, considering Trump's objectives, I think you better keep mobilizing. And this civil society, is it going to be able to systematically oppose? Yeah, it's working out pretty well. I mean, you have demonstrations, but there's a lot of political activities, and the associations are doing unbelievable work, and citizens group in each of the district. I mean, where they have to go to Washington, D.C. The elected officials have to meet, with their constituents, the town halls. It's a bit like, where everybody's allowed to come and ask their elected officials questions. And, they are actually full. People queue up for hours, and they tell about their own personal experience. And there's a debate on the Obamacare sickness insurance, and people, are mobilized. even the Republicans are afraid. I mean, they realize, that their constituents, are actually, they want answers, and they're starting to realize, the people in Washington realize that, there's going to be consequences to what they decide. I don't think we have seen anything like it since the Vietnam War. Yes, I see light at the end of the tunnel. So, Rokhaya Diallo, tell us a little bit about how you see things. So we always have the impression that when one is fighting for one's freedom or rights, that once you have them, they were given. But as we see in Poland and the US and France, things are not going very well. So why is it that women's rights are not, set in stone, and they're extremely fragile, and you have to keep fighting to actually maintain them. And, first of all, I'd like to thank the festival for having organized this round table, and I'd like to also thank the festival for allowing me to discover this documentary, and it makes me very optimistic, but it also makes me realize that there's a long way ahead of us, and the feminist struggle will go on and on and on. And again, no struggle is linear and with successive achievements. No, when oppressed groups succeed in obtaining rights, they're questioning the dominant groups and their privileges, and these people often react in a very brutal way. And again, I think it has to do with the fact that there's been groups who've actually dominated others for centuries. And again, this is bringing into question their own status. I mean, they are afraid. And I think, women are paying for the arrogance when they actually claimed to have the right to be considered as treated as equals as men. And we in Poland and the US, France, things are not a given at all. And just the word feminist, I know that women of my generation, don't want that word, and there's a whole idea of what or vision of what a feminist woman is like, and even women are in favor of the equality between genders. They don't like to admit that they're feminists because this idea of what feminists are like or what they look like. And I hear more teenagers and women who are in their 20s call themselves feminists. So what is happening today is that we have tools such as the social media that actually give voice to many. And the social media and internet are actually a very powerful tool. We saw this with on waves, and it connects people, and it actually disseminates knowledge across the world, and you can put pressure in France. So what we were confronted with recently is the digital era, and today young women, generally speaking, who want to get information on how to get an abortion on the internet, when they actually type IVG, they actually they end up on what pops up on the screen are actually anti-abortion websites, and again, with sort of like the French flag, what they get when they click, they actually get information and websites that are there to try and convince them not to abort. And it's thanks to activists who are working online on social media. So finally, our strugle is not a linear one, and it's very important. It's not the older women who are the most conservative. I mean, they're very young girls who are very conservative. I mean, last Wednesday I was with a 24-year-old woman who's the symbol of anti-feminism, and she said women were paid less because they don't perform as much. I mean, that's exactly what she said. And she said you shouldn't claim to be feminist, and she actually questioned the issue of abortion that's considered as a given. So again, we need to be very careful, because it's not because women are young, that they are not conservative. I think that's the trap we shouldn't fall into. Again, what our elders fought with, I mean, it's not over and done with. You have to keep fighting and fight for other rights. And on the definition of feminist, I consider myself as, a decolonialized feminist. I mean, Françoise used that word. I know it's a new word in the circuit. Can you explain what it means, what it entails? So in the feminist, in the feminine and feminist identities, there's a lot of complexity. I mean, some women are victims of certain oppression, racism, transphobia, homophobia, and ageism, and the feminine struggle shouldn't just be seen from the viewpoint of those who are white and dominant. It also has to take into account women who actually are other, perhaps in topics that are more marginal. And very often, those women who are perhaps more powerful obtain rights to the detriment of more marginal women. So again, I don't want to stigmatize those women who have actually high positions. Again, the Western woman, working woman, and they have access to every levels, have had more time to actually go to university, and again, they don't need to stay at home to look after the home. And so what they've done is they very often take women who've come from other countries or women who are not of white race to do the domestic tasks. I mean, and I'm struck when I go into bourgeois suburbs, when you go to the park in the middle of the afternoon, you have many white children with black or Asian nannies or au pairs. So these women are the ones who actually are paid. And so when we're thinking emancipation, we shouldn't forget about the other women and not just the typical Western professional women. So this is we talked about. In France, there are two questions that divides feminism: is actually prostitution and wearing the veil. And I believe that every woman should decide what she wants. And the fact that today we see women positioning themselves against the women who make choices, and they think that they're obsolete choices. It's always women who end up being the victims of laws that are going to prevent them from dressing this or that way. I mean, that image that shocked the world over this French woman who was on a beach and she was surrounded by a policeman and they forced her to undress. So what is going on? I mean, 40 years ago they would have said you should dress up, and now she's being asked to undress, and it's again men who came on the beach in Nice, and again on behalf of feminists, in the name of principles of secularity. And so these issues are extremely complex. And so do you think or feel that when one talks about feminism, there needs to be certain morals, a charter? It's really complicated. You just told us, I mean, some young women in France actually deny being feminist, and in our country, many people took to the streets for the demonstration for all and marriage for all in France. It was almost like a silent expression of a silent revolution we weren't expecting. We were not expecting seeing so many people who were against mariage pour tous, marriage for all. So again, these issues, are very complex. And you have people who are against the freedom of expression. So my question is for
les manifestations contre le mariage des couples homosexuels ont donné en fait corps à une contestation conservatrice qu'on ne voyait pas et qui
s'exprime beaucoup dans l'élection présidentielle en France en ce moment même.
Très proche du sens commun qui est l'élection
Sa manif au Trocadéro dimanche dernier a été organisée par le mouvement mouvement qui a organisé la manif pour
Voilà,
tous.
et qui a aussi organisé un défilé contre l'avortement tout récemment à
Ouais.
Paris. Donc voilà, à
Donc
Paris
il y a,
en
il y a des
2017.
choses très étranges qui se passent.
Il y a ça, il y a ce retour du conservatisme, mais en même temps, je pense qu'il y a des choses intéressantes qui se produisent, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a des nouvelles revendications qui n'avaient pas vraiment d'existence visible avant, qui sont nées vraiment grâce à l'activisme qui existe sur les réseaux sociaux. Vous avez évoqué le mouvement pour les vies noires aux États-Unis, qui est vraiment né sur Internet, qui est né d'un hashtag de trois femmes en plus, dont deux qui se revendiquent queer, donc ça c'est quelque chose d'assez nouveau, parce qu'il faut aussi rappeler que dans tous les mouvements, pas seulement dans les mouvements pour les femmes, mais dans tous les mouvements d'émancipation, les femmes ont toujours été actives, mais beaucoup ont été effacées de l'histoire, quoi. Aux côtés de Martin Luther King, il y avait des femmes dont on ignore les noms aujourd'hui, mais elles étaient présentes, elles ont largement contribué à l'émancipation des Noirs américains, et c'est pareil partout dans le monde. Donc aujourd'hui, ces femmes-là sont visibles et prennent le micro. Et par exemple, moi, il y a une problématique que je trouve intéressante qui n'était pas du tout audible auparavant, c'est la problématique du harcèlement de rue. C'est-à-dire qu'avant, toutes les femmes considéraient que c'était normal en fait de se faire pourrir par tous les mecs dans la rue, dans le métro, etc. Et grâce en fait à une jeune femme en fait qui est graphiste, qui a monté un Tumblr, donc un microblog de photos qui s'appelle Paytashnek, qui a décidé de collecter en fait toutes les phrases que les femmes vivaient dans la rue, etc. Et grâce à d'autres femmes, une femme en Belgique qui a filmé aussi les commentaires qu'on lui faisait lorsqu'elle se baladait dans les rues de Bruxelles, on s'est rendu compte que c'était anormal, et en fait plein de femmes qui vivaient ça de manière isolée ont pu mutualiser un petit peu leur expérience et leur donner vraiment une résonance nationale. Donc c'est vrai que les réseaux sociaux sont un espace peut-être qu'on en parlera du harcèlement en ligne, parce que j'ai fait un documentaire sur ça, parce que justement, en tant que femme qui s'exprime publiquement, moi j'ai été victime d'une menace de viol, j'ai dû engager un procès. Enfin voilà, c'est que les femmes qui s'expriment sont toujours envoyées à cette condition de femme, mais en même temps, on a des possibilités d'exprimer et de faire monter des voix qui n'existaient pas auparavant. Donc les conservateurs les utilisent, ces moyens-là, mais nous aussi, on a cet outil-là qu'il faut vraiment valoriser et qu'il faut vraiment investir, parce qu'il nous permet de contourner une espèce de doxa conservatrice qui a une force de frappe, mais qu'on peut vraiment aujourd'hui contrecarrer d'une manière qui était impossible auparavant. Si la marche de Washington a donné lieu à autant de marches dans le monde, c'est parce qu'il y avait Internet et les réseaux sociaux qui ont pu donner un écho et mobiliser des gens. 700 marches, c'est juste incroyable. Ça n'aurait pas été possible il y a 10 ans, ne serait-ce que 10 ans.
Alors, sur la définition du mot féminisme, j'aimerais bien avoir votre avis, Agata. Et sur, est-ce que le féminisme doit être l'expression de toutes les libertés? Tout à l'heure, et c'est vrai que ça divise beaucoup les féministes en France, mais pas seulement en France, est-ce qu'une femme voilée peut porter atteinte à la liberté d'être une femme? Il y a des féministes qui, au nom de leur féminisme, disent c'est un scandale que les femmes soient voilées. Aux États-Unis, Françoise, elle doit rigoler quand on se pose ce genre de questions, parce que ça n'existe même pas, cette problématique. Donc, quel mot donner et quelle définition donner du mot féminisme aujourd'hui, Agata?
Bon, je suis féministe de très longue date.
De très longue date, depuis que vous étiez dans votre berceau, alors, parce que vous êtes tellement
oui, c'est quelque chose comme ça. C'est quelque chose comme ça.
Vous aviez une mère féministe.
Pas exactement. C'était vraiment une réaction contre ce qui s'est passé autour de moi. Mais ce que je veux dire, c'est que j'adore le féminisme justement pour le fait qu'il s'exprime toujours en pluriel. C'est pas un féminisme, ce sont les féminismes. Je pense qu'avec cette pluralité, voilà, on peut tirer la leçon pour la démocratie toute nouvelle. Parce qu'avec les nouveaux médias, on voit maintenant qu'on peut partager les mondes, qu'on peut partager les mouvements sociaux très facilement. Et on peut vraiment, comment on dit, créer des problèmes, des conflits, utiliser les uns contre les autres. Et je pense que nous, les féministes, puisque nous n'avons pas eu l'accès au mainstream, mainstream media, par exemple, nous avons appris d'assumer. Voilà, nous sommes pluriels, nous sommes diverses. Nous ne partageons une seule opinion. À chacun son opinion, en fait. Mais on peut agir ensemble. Et je pense que ça, c'est l'avenir de la démocratie. C'est une des raisons que j'appelle pour une nouvelle démocratie, la démocratie féministe. Je pense que c'est le temps pour ça. Pour qu'on utilise ces modèles de pluralité assumés pour rejeter ces modèles d'unité imposée, ce qui se passe maintenant dans la démocratie occidentale, ou dans les démocraties presque partout dans le monde, là où on a emprunté les solutions démocratiques sans vraiment les repenser. Parce que je vois maintenant comment ça marche différemment aux États-Unis, au niveau des États, ou en France, qui est aussi une démocratie très bien établie, et comment il était facile de détruire la démocratie en Pologne. Justement parce que on a joué cette unité imposée, obligatoire. Voilà, vous n'êtes pas unité, voilà, vous avez perdu. Et nous, les féministes, nous comprenons qu'on peut faire autrement, qu'on peut être diverses et toujours agir ensemble. C'est justement la leçon qu'on tire du marche de Washington Women's March. Donc je pense que ça, c'est aussi l'avenir de la politique, l'avenir de la démocratie, si on veut la voir survivre, ces batailles de backlash.
An example of feminisms and how they work together. So in the United States, on reproductive issues, we have different experiences depending on who we are. If we're a black woman, a migrant woman, a white woman, a middle-class woman, rural, urban, right? Because of the access we have to services, the access we have to information, the other discrimination we face, and that Rokhaya explained very well. So what is interesting about the multiple feminisms is that these different experiences enrich each other and challenge each other. So for a long time now in the United States, the battle has been defined in the reproductive field and abortion in particular as reproductive rights, right? So that we should have the right, legal right to have access to abortion. Fine. But women of color have said, well, this doesn't really work very well. I mean, this is necessary, but it's not sufficient for us in our communities because we have a problem of access, affordability. And that is because since 1976, when the federal government passed an amendment that prohibited funding from supporting abortion for women, low-income women, there's a real problem of how you can pay for this, right? So what we need is something more than just your legal right. We need justice. And the whole concept of reproductive justice has really been put on the feminist agenda by women of color in the United States. And it's challenged organizations that have been talking about legal abortion and the rights piece to really rethink their claims and to really reframe their claims to be much broader and frankly to start challenging some of the neoliberal models we have of government and funding of social services which have pushed more and more costs onto individuals, right? So these feminisms are, I think, very rich because we challenge each other. Now, I do think that it's really important, however, not to fall into the trap of everything goes, cultural relativism and anything goes. I do think that women's individual autonomy and women's individual choice for their lives has to be somewhere at the core of feminism, otherwise everything is lost. And that's what we're discussing here with the veil or sex work, similarly with abortion. If that is not at the core, then I don't think we can hold feminism together.
Alors, je crois qu'il y a peut-être des questions dans la salle. Et
I think that there are some questions for the people in the audience. I would like to call the person who organized the demonstration in Geneva, which was quite followed and where lots of people, to express her point of view. I've explained what is happening here in Geneva. Congratulations for what you did. I would like to say that I didn't organize. I co-organized with Karen Olsen, who is on my right, and she deserved the applause. Yes, thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the festival for inviting us and for listening to our voices and our experiments. And we were between 2,000 and 2,500 in Geneva, January 21st, last January, and a few days ago, on March the 8th also. And it gave me the opportunity to experience what it is to be so diverse feminists, such diverse feminists. It was about concentrating the feminine issue and also our political proposals, and in the momentum not to forget this cross-sectoral approach, not forget that we as a white woman having studied, being well paid, and we have a same agenda as others, and we are still fighting with that on a global way. And as a binational American and Swiss, it gives me the hope that there is also this momentum abroad, also on the side of the Democrats and as of the Republicans, and you have on both sides forces who try to fight against and try to denounce the abuse committed of either side. So the march of 8 March was dedicated to the inequalities, wage inequalities in Switzerland, which is going on also in France. And as we could see in this documentary this afternoon, the issue remains acute, and it's 20% difference for same work between men and women. It's a difference in the wages. So, and this responsibility is to talk to each other and to watch picture which might be shocking for some of us, in order to see what it means to be different, to have different bodies, especially when you deal with the issue of abortion, and they are fundamental issues and they are common to all of us. So that's what I wanted to say about, concerning this Women's March, but maybe you wanted to suggest something else for our action. I wanted to know if there were other questions in the audience or testimonies or just issues raised or questions you would like to ask to our 3 ambassadors of a very diverse feminism. So I see there are quite a lot of questions. Good evening. I just wanted also to clarify something about Switzerland. We have many people who do not know that in 2000 there was an amendment to the law about the social insurances. The people can renounce to services from these insurers, for instance, in the area of abortion, and you have insurances who concluded agreements with, who made agreements with some partners so you can write that you are going to renounce to your to the reimbursement of an abortion, but you have to revoke this decision and then change an insurance, and in certain contracts you have to have your children sign the document that they are not going to do an abort And also, I wanted to say pro-life on its website explained that each insured must be aware of the suppression of these services, and the person concerned, they don't say that a person, if they really need to be reimbursed, they don't say. So this is something new and something which is not known, and it's important. So you could write to these insurances not to do such contracts with people who are lying about this thing and put the pressure on women. And I also wanted to say that on March the 8th there was a demonstration at night. We were 950. It wasn't told in the medias, so I just wanted to add that because it was a good demonstration. Thank you very much. Thank you for these informations. The winds are bad for women. 20 years ago, one would never have thought that this kind of behavior towards the women's body would happen. These fights led by men, I can just want to remind you that it's a man of the right wing, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, who authorized abortion, and it was a woman, Simone Weil, who was legally carrying this fight for the right to abortion. It was quite a difficult fight, and we thought that it was okay, that it was done forever for our daughters, for our granddaughters, and to hear what is happening now against the body of the women, it's just incredible. So I see that the new young generation are quite optimistic as for the future of women and the freedom of expression of women thanks to internet. But you were right also to say you have also a lot of provocation and the perversion in certain social medias. There we will also have to find collective means to ensure our own freedoms. There were other questions in the room. Yes, thank you very much.
You talked a lot about what divides feminists and people on the topic of feminism. And a topic I've discussed a lot is positive discrimination. And I'm very curious to know what you think looking forward. What is the role of positive discrimination for women? And do we need to go through a period of positive discrimination in order to lead to equality between men and women? Thank you.
Alors, Agata, Rokhaya, allez-y, Agata.
Well, I think positive discrimination is somewhat an obsolete concept at this point, not because we don't need it. Well, we obviously do, because the situation of women and men is still unequal. But because we have invented some other mechanism, much broader than just specific tool that is the positive discrimination. I'm talking about gender mainstreaming, for example, which is a huge mechanism, still a little bit, well, it needs some polishing, but we can see how it works. We can see how it has changed our societies in a matter of years. In a matter of, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, the situation of women was so much different. And really, I believe that we are much more equal now than we were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And that we are feeling that this equality, this concept of equality is no longer sufficient. And for that, it is being attacked because it is feeble. It is not exactly in place. We need a new one. We need a new conception of equality because the world has advanced so much that the old one is obsolete. And, well, is it a good answer to your question? Is it okay?
I just have. I'm not sure that positive discrimination is not discrimination, and this keeps the idea that we are committing something unjust. The discrimination are structural, are from a long history, and we are just seek to re-establish a balance. And when we take, for instance, in the French Parliament, you have less than 25% of women. It's not because the women are bad, it's because the men are bad, because they deserve to be there. They benefit from the fact that other people are ill-treated. So when you make positive discrimination, you re-establish a balance. And I think all the means are good, all the tools are good to allow women to emerge in different places. But generally, the policies of positive action do happen in areas which are very competitive, and it doesn't happen for positions which are quite difficult to reach. But you have in politics, you have a lot of women who appeared on the political fields, but you have a lot of women who wouldn't be so visible if the idea wasn't imposed since 2012 that you have to have a parity. So it's to allow to the women to appear on the public scenes and to normalize their presence, also the fact that they are present. But you have to think of more complex mechanisms to allow other women on other levels to appear and to be visible. Thank you, Rokhaya. What can be added as for the positive discrimination? It's very complicated because all the three of you are saying that de facto equality allowed us to go forward, but you have then and then you have still this inequality in wages. It goes from 17 to 20% across all Europe. And as for politics, there was a feminist debate. You had women like Elisabeth Bata, why quotas, but we belong to the universal, to the universe, because we belong to the definition of mankind, so we refuse this idea of quotas. But others would say, let's be concrete, let us allow more women to accede to politics, which in France is a kind of a sanctuary, which is quite erotical, where the men take advantage of it to have even more erotical capacity, so-called. But there was an accessibility for the women thanks to the policy of quotas, because we belong to the universe, I think, to mankind. When one speaks of man, human being, it's also the woman. So it allowed women to arrive in a political area which remains very masculine. And maybe you don't know, in France, when the policy of quotas is not applied in France, the parties have to pay a fine. If this quota policy is not implemented, and it's not implemented in France, and all the parties, except the ecological party, prefer to pay lots of money to the state because they are fined, instead of letting women accede to political power. And that shows a lot about our invisibility. So you see, there is always this treachery of women linked with the law. So I agree with Rokhaya. All the means are good to try to reach this real equality. And Françoise, I agree with you. I call this assertiveness, affirmative action. We need both, of course. We need this gender mainstreaming, and we have to use this to ask questions about these gender issues everywhere. But when you see the boards of big companies, if we wait for this equality, it will take about 150 years. Just just 1 second about the board. Sometimes the men think that they can do charity with us to calm us down. It was the case in France for the accessibility of women, so that there would be an equality of women and men in boards. I belong to 4 boards of companies. We have no power in a board. We are just here to listen. And sometimes when you speak up a bit too loud, they listen to you. But it's not the reality. It's not the real power. So let us stop to make the women believe that they will have some crumbles, just giving them a pseudo visibility. I agree with you. This example was not it was not in a way of showing that it's the most important achievement. But if you leave the things go on naturally, it will take 150 years. You are very optimistical. I'd say it take 2,000 years. So we need targeted mechanisms. Otherwise, we will not achieve that. We are working with women groups and exerting oppression in many countries, in the UN, and we are here every day. We follow them, and we put the text into their hands so that the right of the women are recognized in a document which will be negotiated. If we are not around, they forget, even on topics where one thinks that the question of women, the issue of women should be mentioned, for instance, in the area of education, or there is a commission on the status of women in the UN. You have 2-week meetings. The topic is the women in the working context, and you have lots of issues. They fall back in a very basic things. All this aspect concerning the education of women, of girls, sexual health, and so on. If we are not around to exert the pressure, nothing happens in text, and the men do not recognize just many elements in the text, so we may constantly exert this pressure. And we need some feminist men, and there are much more than we think.
So, another question? Yes, up at the top. Another question. Oh, sorry, but we can't see anything.
Hello. My name is Waleska Pareja. I come from Ecuador. Actually, it was really nice to see my country in the screen. So I just wanted to share something new with you, I think. Because even though we have these amazing women working in my country, like Ana Cristina Vera, Verónica Vera, Manuela Villafuerte, these people appear in the movie, in the documentary, but I also would like to share with you that now we have lots of women criminalized, actually, for having abortions, because even though we used to have a different criminal code, now we have a new one, but actually with the same provision, the same criminal provision. And more than 200 women and girls and adolescents, teenagers, they've been put to jail because they are having an abortion. So even though before we used to have the same provision, it was never enforced. So yes, we have to, I think I just wanted to share this with you because we have to fight, not only with lawmakers, but also in different and in small things, like jokes, like language. It's a struggle. And for me, it's something very important to see my country in the screen so you can learn about us, because as Madame said, sometimes we're only thinking about white women. And there are also Latin women, Black women, we're all different. So it's important to have all these differences. Indigenous people, we have, diversity is amazing in my country and in general in the world. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour votre témoignage.
Thank you for your testimonial, and perhaps Françoise, and you're working at the international level, where perhaps we can, map out what is happening and the main struggles.
Much for this. And I think it's very important that you mentioned this, that when you have repressive laws, women do go to jail. Yeah, we often think it just is on the books, and No, I mean, we have women in jail in Ecuador, we have women in jail in Salvador. Nice. Yeah, and the intent is to put them in jail, and also doctors go to jail. So, in Poland, you want to put the husbands as well?
Well, actually, the husband who is facilitating and aiding a woman to abort is being punished for that legally, even if the woman is not being punished for aborting.
And do you have any husbands in jail now?
Well, I don't think so, actually, because this is very, very hard to enforce, obviously. But, well, the provision is there in the legal system. So,
yeah. So it's meant also to, it has a chilling effect. But I think the point that is really important to make is that any of these laws tend to be applied in a discriminatory fashion much more to poor women, women of color, migrant women. You know, if you look in the countries where women end up in jail, lo and behold, there are often indigenous women and poor women and women of color. Wealthy women will always be able to get safe services, right? They will be able to pay and work their way through the private system. And it's poor women and young women and rural women who will try to access the system through the public system or through the clandestine providers and end up prosecuted. And we see this all over the world. So that is the question of justice that is really at the core of this business, which we really need to keep putting on the table.
Vous voulez intervenir, Agathe?
Agata.
this is an opening to something that I'm trying to say wherever I go. There is this old concept by Karl Marx of formal and real freedoms. And while equality is an ideal, l'égalité c'est une idée, c'est un idéal, mais quand même les libertés.
It's an ideal, but formal freedoms are always, they're not in sync. So what we want to do is to have a match to actually move forward and to get as close as possible to this ideal of equality. In real life, that's not, I mean, Poland, you know, wealthy women have the possibility of getting an abortion, whereas, you know, formally speaking, they are free to work and to be paid equal salaries as men, but it doesn't work even for the very wealthy women. So we see that there's a so there's about a 25-27% difference in salaries between men and women. This is very serious, very worrying, and there's still this difference. So for me, it's at the very heart of politics. And again, real freedoms or real equality has to go hand in hand with what's still now idealistic equality. And so we're going to have to now leave one another, close this session. So here's my question to the three of you: what is the importance of feminism? What will be what's the importance of feminism for the future, and what should be its priority? So. Agata. So we can start by indicating that it's what counts as the mentality, the mindset, and again, mindset is what stops equality. I mean, again, it's the hurdle. I mean, feminism shows us, you know, the new route, opens new doors, offers new possibilities. If we don't have power, because we have a very few feminist parties in Europe. I mean, there are a few, but they don't have much power politically speaking. And if we don't have power, we can always, you know, act on people's imagination and I think this is, the priority for feminism, to actually open people's imagination. And that's the answer to the question on positive discrimination, which, in my opinion, should have an impact on the mindset, on people's imagination, and to change Castoriadis calls imaginary institutions of society. So I may reiterate what I've just said, but priority is to actually listen to everyone. And feminism shouldn't just be centered around certain viewpoints, but it should take into account all viewpoints. And the second thing I wanted to talk about was the violence against women's bodies. I mean, this is a war weapon. This is a priority because women are being subjected to abuse, and in every country, and it's atrocious. And these are acts of violence that are not punished. So again, so I think safety for women is a priority.
I wanted to add another, I won't repeat this, but I agree with it, but I wanted to add another point, which is that given what has been achieved by feminist movements, and we're talking, remember the right to vote, and this is a long fight, right? And all of that has been gained, has come as the result of feminist organizing and movement building and pressure and mobilization. Nothing has been given to women because men felt like giving it to women. They've taken everything. We have taken everything. And so it is incredible. And all these backlashes is because we started, the trouble, and we started demanding all these things, and we won't stop. So what would be incredibly important is for women's movements and feminist movement to be supported to do their work. Women continue, speaking of the unequal payment to women, women's movements, social movements tend to continue to work on a shoestring with very little resources. There's research that shows that globally, the average budget of a women's group worldwide is $20,000 to do everything that they do. So that's very little annually. You can't even pay your staff. So we need more donors, and I hope they're listening to this festival, to support women's groups, the women's movement that is doing this brave, courageous, tireless, tiresome sometimes work, and without whom none of this would work.
Merci, merci à Agata, merci à Rokhaya, merci à Françoise et merci au public. De nombreuses femmes, mais aussi quand même pas mal d'hommes. Et vive le féminisme, on en aura bien besoin. Et c'est pas parce qu'on est une femme qu'on est forcément féministe, hélas.
Oh là là, bon. Alors, je prends mon courage à deux mains, parce que en tant que représentant non qualifié de l'autre sexe, alors j'avais une petite remarque adjacente, c'est qu'on a opposé à propos de l'action positive ou de la discrimination, et c'est vous qui l'avez fait, Laure Adler, l'universalité, en parlant d'Elisabeth Badinter, l'universalité à la diversité. Et c'est un grave problème qui nous préoccupe.
Serious problem, which is of concern to all of us. Universality and equality are not contradictory one another. I mean, again, I mean, Laure Adler, you're gonna be happy to hear me say this, and that's the sentence of Girard, who said. So again, a universal equals the sum of singularities. So here's my question on equality at the citizen level. Are there still countries in the world where women are deprived of the fundamental right to vote? Are there countries where women cannot vote? You know there are countries where women cannot vote. Saudi Arabia. I mean, I can't tell you. There are other countries, yes. And in fact, in Saudi Arabia, things are changing because at the local level, women can actually vote and can even be candidates. But it's not universal. I mean, again, we've got a long road ahead of us. But we're here. We're here.